Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 7 of Stat Chasing. We had an exciting week in week 6. Couple rookie wide receivers that flashed their first time seeing the field and seeing meaningful usage, and also got to see some new look backfields in Seattle and in Los Angeles with the Rams that we'll be breaking down this week. Connor, how did your week 6 go for fantasy?
Um, in my daily kind of best ball stuff, I more or less broke even. I had some teams that were solid, but never really sniffed at top of the leaderboard, and I suppose that's just kind of the way it goes. You're just praying for that one sweat. Maybe you get a handful of real sweats per season, and
Yeah.
that was not this week.
Yeah. I was traveling last week, so I didn't get a chance to play any daily fantasy or any best ball on Underdog, anything like that. But yeah, didn't have the best week in my managed leagues. I think a couple frustrating injury situations that were tough. I think the T Higgins thing was one that was tricky to know how to handle. But yeah, not the best week, but what can you do? Gotta keep moving forward, and hopefully with the bye weeks coming up, with how I've built some of my teams with deep wide receiver benches, hopefully can string together some wins here. But
Right.
we'll find out.
Yeah, that would help, right?
Yeah, that's how it works in theory. We'll test it in practice coming up, but yeah. Anyways, let's dive into the data here for weeks 1 through 6, and for folks listening live, feel free to ask any questions in the YouTube chat. We'll try to cover it here live. And obviously, just a plug for those listening either on video after the stream or listening on podcast apps. You are able to join the Ship Chasing Discord. You can find more info in the description for the YouTube video here, and you're able to access these streams live and ask us questions in the chat or even after the show in the Discord. So just wanted to give a quick plug for that before we dive into the data here. So like always, we'll start with quarterback. And here we're looking at quarterback passing efficiency, and rushing production for all of the league's starting quarterbacks or projected starters going forward. So here on the y-axis, for those following along on video, we have touchdown rate, so percentage of throws that end up in a touchdown. And on the x-axis, we have adjusted yards per attempt, which is a simple yards per attempt metric, but adjusted for interceptions and touchdowns. So, for example, you'll see Kenny Pickett is way off to the left here. He has a bad adjusted yards per attempt because in a relatively small sample, he's thrown 4 interceptions and just 1 touchdown. So that will really weigh down guys like that who have way more interceptions than touchdowns. So, anyways, that's the chart here. And again, I guess last thing to add, the size of the bubble here is rushing yards. So you really see guys like Lamar, Jalen Hurts pop in a big way here. Drico, the thing that stands out to me first from the start, maybe we can start the conversation here, is Bailey Zappi, way off on the top right corner next to guys like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Tua. Now, obviously, he doesn't have the rushing prestige of some of those guys, but he has been really good over the past couple weeks. In my sort of takeaways, which I posted on Twitter, I thought that he is a viable streaming candidate if he continues to start over Mac Jones. Do you have any thoughts on Bailey Zappi going forward if he continues to start games here?
Yeah, so I guess one thought I did have was a zappy slappy. One thought I did have is that it is a relatively small sample size. So he's got 70 pass attempts, and he's done really, really well with those 70 pass attempts. And I think that I think that being very efficient, like on this scale, is really strong. It's a really strong start, and that if you are in trouble at quarterback, there's probably worse directions that you can go. Um, I guess one discomfort I would have if there was a kind of like a legitimate option, like I'm not starting him over, let's say Jared Goff or Geno Smith, and the reason for that would be obviously the rushing is low, and then it you can have a guy who comes out the gate playing well, in the first two games, and then because it's a small sample size, it's not always reliable as you want, and then the next game it craters. But I'm trying to find the
Yeah.
nuance of like saying it's really encouraging, really exciting,
Yeah.
but you have to keep in mind that this could regress in a big way.
Yeah, I agree with that largely. I think, I'm still starting Geno, still starting Jared Goff over him. I think once you start to get down to guys like in your deeper leagues, maybe if you're considering between him and Kenny Pickett coming off that concussion, that's maybe a decision point. If you're deciding between him and Jimmy G, Ryan Tannehill, I think that's a decision point. I think that's kind of the tier of guys
Yeah,
he
for
falls
sure.
into. But yeah, and then I guess the other thing to mention on Zappy that I thought was interesting is the Patriots were up for almost all of that game. And something we saw with the Patriots last year in games that were close or where they were winning, which didn't happen very frequently, but certainly decent sample size. They were willing just to run the shit out of the ball. They didn't really let Mac Jones throw it around much. Last week, I believe the Patriots got, what was it, up to, I think, 40 plus pass attempts. I'd have to check the box score again for Zappy.
I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah. Okay, so it was 34 pass attempts. So again, yeah, not massive volume, but in a game where they were leading the entire way, that's still pretty solid.
Right.
So I think that's just something to consider that, and maybe it was due to the Damian Harris injury as well, that they're willing to lean on the pass a bit more, but we saw them throw it even in a game where they're leading the whole time. So that's something to consider where in negative game scripts, there could be a lot of volume. But yeah, I think that's the right sort of nuance that you touched on around Zappy, like viable streamer, but not someone you're starting over the normal starters or even
Right.
guys like Goff or Geno you probably picked up off the wire already.
One thing that I found interesting about this chart is that Joe Burrow, he's moved into the good section. He's moved from the bad section of the chart in the kind of he was in the kind of bottom left. Now
He's
he's in the
moved out of the
like,
Davis Mills zone, which is good to see.
yeah. And I think it's interesting in how with the sample size that we're working with, how one game can truly change that in a kind of dramatic way, and completely change the picture that you're looking at. And I think that is that's kind of like important to keep in mind with some of these kind of underperforming players that have played really well in the past. Like what I mean, I guess the context for Kyler Murray is almost too bad to I guess at this point expect a huge jump in efficiency. But he is someone who has had really, really good games, and they do get nuked back. And we just have an example of how one game can completely change the perception on a player.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I almost I was watching that Denver Chargers game last night. And in the first half, the Denver passing offense actually looked quite good. Russell Wilson was connecting on some deep plays. It didn't look like incredible by any means, but I was starting to maybe come around there.
It
And
looked
then
like a real offense.
yeah, it looked like a real offense. Second half completely collapsed. But I think Russ is another guy that jumps out there where the media narrative is so against Russ. He's been in all these primetime games where he's looked awful, and he has been bad. I will say I do think part of how bad they've been is just really, really, really bad red zone efficiency. And some of that is probably structural. Like Russ looks bad down there. He's throwing up these gross floaters. He's immediately turning around and running every time he sees pressure. Like it doesn't look good, but I think that's a situation where the red zone efficiency is going to positively regress. And I'm not here to tell you Russ Wilson is going to be a top 5 quarterback the rest of the way, but people might be really down on him in your league. So he's another guy where if you can get him for really cheap, maybe in super flex where you can kind of get more value out of it, that's a place I might be looking, because again, his adjusted net yards per attempt or adjusted yards per attempt is quite high, even with a really low TD rate. So that tells you that I think he's maybe not playing as bad as the media narrative sort of would lead you to
so
believe.
one piece of context, and I was just thinking about this because I think I made this point on Russell Wilson that his adjusted yards per attempt is still quite good, is that he holds the ball a long time, so he takes a lot of sacks.
Yeah, sacks are not factored in here, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. And so I think we have to kind of like visually adjust that. He's probably closer to the average in adjusted yards per attempt when you account for the sacks and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like,
yeah, I think it would be interesting if we had this data, and I haven't really seen people break it down like this, but sort of a yards per drop back statistic that factored in both sacks as well as like scrambles and rushing yards. I think that would be interesting to see how that affects guys like Russ, who take a lot of sacks, or guys like Lamar, who maybe adding a lot through the ground on their dropbacks. But just a hypothetical thing, maybe worth checking out in future weeks.
Yeah, anyways, maybe we should be doing this per dropback.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool. Yeah,
like that would be a good adjustment for sure.
Yeah. Anything else on the quarterbacks that jumps out to you, Connor? I think we've been doing this for 6 weeks now, so I think we've touched on a lot of these guys.
The trends are the same for the most part.
Yeah.
I think we're both seeing that. I think that it's probably worth pointing out. So we have Tua Tagovailoa in here just because he is expected to start next week. But one thought I did have about that is that the sample size of games is smaller for him than the rest of the players, which probably does help. Because he had such outlier games, it probably is a factor in terms of pushing him on to be the leader in adjusted yards per attempt. And I'd have to imagine that if he had the bigger sample size, that he'd be closer to the average by maybe a smidge. But having said that, still happy to fire him up in probably if you have him, unless it's over like a Josh Allen or like a Patrick Mahomes, a true elite option. Still very strong play, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm starting him over like the Mariota, like Rodgers, Derek Carr type sort of guys in that range. I think I'm taking the risk with Tua if he's coming back this week. I'm a believer in the Miami scheme and the talent at wide receiver. Just watching those games, Tyreek Hill is just getting open with such ease. Jalen Waddle can stretch the field and also do the yak stuff that Tyreek can do. It seems to be a really good passing scheme with talented weapons. So I agree. It's a small sample. Like I don't expect Tua to stay on the top right corner of this chart with that level of efficiency, but I do still see him as a high upside quarterback going forward that I'm
for sure
taking a shot on.
And I think the evidence has been that he is additive to the offense. Like it's not like they can just run out any other quarterback and ball out. Like they've genuinely missed him over the past couple of games. Like there's a very noticeable difference in the offense when he plays, which I think is kind of like a strong sign in that there should be good efficiency, good to strong efficiency for him going forward.
Yep. I agree.
One point, I just changed in my spreadsheet. I just changed Russell Wilson from using the attempts to dropbacks, and by using dropbacks, it pushes them from a 7.1 adjusted yards per attempt to 6.1, which is still, I guess, if you look at where the chart is 6.1, that pushes them closer to the I guess just ahead of Matthew Stafford range.
Yeah, and I guess to be fair to him, like you would have to do that adjustment for everybody, right? So like everybody's probably shifting a little bit, but I'm guessing that with the amount of sacks he's taking, he is shifting like the most to the left on this chart, if you want to visualize it like that relative to other players. But yeah, that's a good point. And maybe next week we will have that view for quarterbacks. So
I think we should.
Yeah. Okay, great. Moving on to running back here. So the expected points chart is back after a brief absence last week. I thought it was interesting to bring back this week for a couple reasons. But to those following along on video and on audio, I suppose we're looking at running back workloads in terms of expected fantasy points, and also looking at their efficiency, so fantasy points over or under expected. Here in this chart on the y-axis, we have receiving workload. So you see guys like Austin Eckler really spiking there with massive receiving roles. And on the x-axis, we see rushing expected fantasy points. So you see guys like Chubb, Derrick Henry, Taylor, etc., showing up with huge workloads there, as we would expect. So Connor, my first takeaway in looking at this chart, I think Eckler is a guy that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit in fantasy this season. I think the first couple weeks, people were really scared about his role. He didn't really have a high snap rate. A lot of Michelle and Josh Kelly mixing in for rushing attempts. But this receiving workload, I don't know if it's a product of Keenan Allen being out, but it's really, really spiked recently. I believe he had 10 catches last night in a truly gross, like compiling PPR effort. But still, anytime a running back can get 10 catches, that's just flashing amazing upside for PPR formats. But yeah,
it's like what you call it? It's like last year a little bit, isn't it? Where they came in with this plan of, oh hey, we can't just give every touch to Austin Eckler. He's one of our best players. We need to like preserve him. And then they realized that the guys that they brought in to take the load are just not up to snuff. And they're having to go back to Austin Eckler a lot more. And then I believe who was the backup running back for the Chargers?
Josh Kelly went down with a knee injury. Yeah.
So that probably helped them there.
Yeah.
But he's also been quite strong in the last couple of games. And I think the other part of it is that he's also good at football.
Very good.
So that's something where a guy can get maybe more. Maybe he is in a committee, or his snap share isn't quite as strong as you'd like, but he just plays so well that he's getting you touchdowns, he's getting you production, and he's definitely in that category.
Yep. And it's an interesting sort of contrast. We'll see when we go to the snaps chart in a little bit. He does not really flash there, but in terms of just raw expected fantasy points per game, he is now third at running backs behind only Joe Mixon and Leonard Fournette. He's at 18.7 total expected fantasy points per game. So that's anytime you're getting approaching 20 over this large of a sample size, that's a really, really strong expected fantasy points workload. And like you said, he's a talented running back. I expect him to be able to add fantasy points on top of that through his efficiency and that Chargers offense being, hopefully pretty high scoring. So yeah, if you have Eckler, I think you're pretty excited. Outside of, I'm not sure he wouldn't be the third running back, and maybe best ball resurrection's over, so we can't check.
So I was actually just going to make that point. So the best ball resurrection is over, but we still do have ADPs from the daily best ball, and obviously that is only the main slate. When you're looking at the I guess the biggest sample only includes the main slate. But Austin Eckler, he is the third running back overall by ADP, and he goes at an average of pick 6.7. That's 5 picks ahead of Nick Chubb, and then 6.5 picks ahead of Christian McCaffrey.
That is interesting. Yeah, looking at these ADPs, like Derrick Henry is the first running back.
Right.
Where I guess half PPR is a slightly different game. I can see why he's in the same range as those guys, but I think I'm pretty easily taking Eckler over Henry. I probably am taking McCaffrey over Eckler though.
Right.
So I guess that's probably about right at what his ADP is. So
yeah, I think that that Underdog is obviously a fairly sharp site, and they've definitely noticed that that increase in production for Eckler.
Yeah.
The one running back that should be on this chart that is still discounted is Breece Hall. So Breece Hall goes at a pick of an average of 30, which is the last round in these best ball dailies, and that kind of baffles me. That's obviously a huge priority target. When he's getting over 15 expected points per game, he's a rookie who's playing really well. He does it in the run game and the receiving game. Kind of a smash pick there, right?
Yeah, pick 30. I don't know why he's going so late, and I think there's even upside. We saw it in like the first couple games with Joe Flacco. There was these massive receiving roles for some of these backs because the game script kind of got out of hand for the Jets. Now the Jets have been good enough that they've been up in these games against the Packers. I'm blanking on who it was the week before that, but they've had some weird game script that I don't really expect going forward. So once the Jets start to have to throw more, I think that actually helps Breece Hall's ceiling because we've seen those running backs rack up a ton of catches in the first couple of weeks. So yeah,
right, he's going to be
Hall.
a big part of their offense. A large part of their offense is going to have to run through Breece Hall.
Yeah, that offense, it seems to be Hall, a little bit of Carter, Garrett Wilson, and Corey Davis in the passing game, and that's about it. Not a lot going to Elijah Moore, other periphery pieces there. So a lot of fantasy points going to the running backs on the Jets. Connor, the other thing I wanted to call out, just sort of a quick note, Deion Jackson's role was really strong last week. Now, I think this is actually averaging 2 weeks of Deion Jackson starts.
Right.
Or not starts, sorry, 2 weeks of Deion Jackson getting snaps. And one of them was the week when Hines was still around and he didn't have a huge workload. But last week he had a massive workload, I believe, off the top of my head, close to 20 expected fantasy points, had like 80 plus receiving yards. So if Taylor and Hines remain out, he is a must start.
23.5 expected points.
23.5. Yeah.
He actually scored 28. So really strong game for him.
Yeah, he looks really good out there. Just like an eye test thing. Definitely looks better. I mean, I don't know what happened to Philip Lindsay, but man, that guy, like, it's hard to describe. You got to watch him play, but he does this thing where he does this like stutter step forever and it just goes nowhere. He looks like he has no juice out there, but that's just a random aside. Deion Jackson, definitely add him. I think Taylor will probably be back and Hines is probably not out for too much longer, but he's definitely worth like a cheap ad on the wire where you can get him and just see if you get another spot start out of him this week versus the Titans. Any other running back situations you wanted to talk through in the AFC, or shall we move on?
I think, we have another chart.
And
that I think is better for some of these situations.
Yep, for sure. So touching quickly on the NFC here, same chart, just with the NFC running backs, so we can compare sort of across, backfields, look at committees within a certain team. The thing that stands out to me here, Connor, is there's a pretty clear, and we see it a little bit in the AFC too. There's a pretty clear separation of the haves and have-nots in the NFC. We essentially have 4 workhorse backs in the NFC with Barkley, Fournette, Kamara, and McCaffrey. And I think Barkley, Fournette, and McCaffrey, those aren't surprising to anybody who's been following the show or who's been following fantasy this year. those guys have been getting massive workloads all year. I think the Kamara one is interesting because he has really shot up this chart over the last couple weeks with Andy Dalton playing and a ton of the wide receivers being out. Michael Thomas has been out. Chris Olave got concussed. Jarvis Landry has been out. So a ton of the pass game usage has been funneling to Kamara. And as a result, we're seeing this massive receiving workload for him. So yeah, question for you. What do you like on this chart? If you're just, looking at it sort of blindly without the context, you would see, Kamara and McCaffrey should be valued, about the same, similar workloads. What do you think about that with Kamara going forward? Do you expect this usage to continue with the wide receivers returning, or do you think this is sort of a small blip on the radar for him?
So I think I still would have McCaffrey a good bit ahead of Kamara. So I guess one of the big concerns for Kamara is that it's the Taysom Hill monster where they just decide this is going to be the Taysom Hill game, and he gets a lot of the touchdowns, he gets a lot of the yardage too, and I guess another issue I have with Kamara is that and maybe this is too film grindery. It does kind of look like he's still, like, while he's still very good, he's not quite the same player that he was. Whereas Christian McCaffrey looks like vintage Christian McCaffrey.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that's like an important distinction or difference.
Yeah, and it shows up here in the data. Kamara, McCaffrey has way more fantasy points over expected than Kamara. I think Kamara is actually underperforming his workload. Yeah, on the season, he's averaging about -3 fantasy points over expected per game, whereas McCaffrey is at +2.2 fantasy points over expected per game. So sort of a 5-point difference there in terms of efficiency, just looking at the fantasy points over expected metric between McCaffrey and Kamara. Yeah, I think I'm with you. The TD equity is a concern for New Orleans. Number one, I don't think that offense is that great. Number two, the Taysom Hill situation. And I really do think, to the point I was sort of hinting at earlier, I do think that Kamara's role, if number one, Jameis comes back, he takes a hit. Number two, once Olave, Michael Thomas come back, he's going to take a hit. So he's racked up a lot of receiving yards the past 2 weeks. I think an average about 60 per game on 6 catches per game. I don't expect that to hold once all these receivers come back. They're truly trotting out like Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith, some real sort of dumpster dive guys at wide receiver right now, which is funneling a lot of stuff to Kamara.
Right. And then I guess some of the other issue, like you said, the per game average on his fantasy points over expected has been bad, but some of the one of the on the detail, one of the most concerning things for me is that so last week he had expected receiving yards of 50. He came in at 25. Not sure on and then the average. So his 2 games before week 4, I think that was week 1 and 2. He had an expected receiving yards of 50. He came in at 19. Like the detail. Obviously, this is a little bit small sample size, but the detail there of him coming in way under what his expected receiving yards should be is it's definitely concerning, given that the eye test is making it look like he's not quite as good as he was.
Yeah, and we have a whole. I mean, I think we also have all of last year where we saw he was not the same old Kamara in terms of efficiency. He was a guy who always got there on pretty low volume and just insane efficiency. And last year he was more of a volume play with middling efficiency, and we're kind of seeing that again this year with Kamara. So yeah, I agree. It's concerning. I see McCaffrey, Fournette, Barkley, and Kamara sort of in this tier on the chart. I am way higher on the other three, especially McCaffrey and Barkley, than Kamara going forward. Any other situations?
So just want to say historical anomalies. Appreciate you always catching the shows, always with the appreciation. Thanks, dude.
Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, if you have any quick questions, let us know in the live chat, guys. We'll be happy to answer them. I think Connor, I think we can probably move on to the snaps chart now, unless there's anything else.
Sure.
Yep, let's do it. So, still looking at running backs here. We're now looking at their usage. So the first two charts, we're looking at usage in terms of expected fantasy points. Now we're looking at usage just in terms of percent of team plays that they are getting a rush attempt or a route. So those are kind of the juicy snaps where they're either directly getting the ball, rush attempt obviously, or they're running a passing route and have the opportunity to earn a target. We want to see workhorse running backs have a high percentage of their team plays where they're either getting the ball or they're out there running a route where they can earn a target. So it's sort of an interesting way. Yep, go ahead.
And I guess one note is, so this chart was inspired after a conversation with Ben Gretsch, where he had said, when for most running backs, unless it's a screenplay, when they get a target, it's usually not by design. Normally, it's because something down the field more desirable didn't work out as intended, and they're a check down option. There are some running backs like Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, who are true weapons, and the team will look to find ways to get them involved and make them a big part of their offense, receiving wise. But for most running backs, that's not the case. And because of that, we want to concentrate more on just who's out there ready to receive a target rather than expected receiving based on the targets they did get.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, like you'll see McCaffrey and Eckler run these routes out of the backfield where it almost looks like they're the primary read. They have a mismatch on the linebacker. They sort of do that. I don't know what's called, that V route where they cut to the right and then cut to the middle. Yeah, and you see that. But then, with guys like Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs, even Leonard Fournette, it's more so their targets are Brady looks down the field, nobody's open. Okay, Fournette's here. Like, let's dump it off to him. So there's definitely a difference between those two types of backs. But for the latter, we definitely just want to see them running a high percentage of routes because that'll give them a chance. The guys like Nick Chubb, Josh Jacobs, Fournette, who maybe aren't special wide receivers, we want to see them out there running a lot of routes because they're probably not getting designed looks in the passing game. It'll more have to be sort of on volume of just being out there on routes. So,
and Darrell Henderson is probably a good example of that, where like nobody thinks of Darrell Henderson as this like supremo running back receiving force, but we see that he is running a very high percentage of his team's routes, which is pretty. Even though it's not a very good offense right now, it's kind of a bad offense. It's still exciting to see a running back run that kind of route share.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Henderson's maybe a good person to start this conversation with all the turmoil in the Los Angeles Rams backfield. So Henderson's an interesting one on this chart because he always shows up here as having the sort of top 12, RB1 usage in terms of percentage of team plays where he's on the field. But as you can see here, that dark green bar for rush attempts is very low relative to the other guys on this chart. When he's out there, he's more so just running routes. He's not really getting any rush attempts when he's out there. That's more so been the Cam Akers or last week Malcolm Brown role. But he is running a ton of routes. So I've been struggling with how to approach this Rams backfield going forward. I think I want to be buying Henderson just because I think with this big of a workload of just being on the field and with Akers going away, I think the market is still a little low on him. But yeah, do you have thoughts? I know there's also other guys we can discuss like Malcolm Brown and Kyren Williams potentially coming back, but do you have thoughts on the Rams backfield going forward from sort of a season long fantasy perspective of how you would try to play it?
For some reason, and Darrell Henderson is always going at a discount.
Yeah.
So if he is probably going to be the primary beneficiary, just because he was already kind of like a 1A 1B with Cam Akers, and now with him out of the picture, even though Malcolm Brown is there, and I'm definitely excited about Kyren Williams. He, especially with the discounts that he tends to go at, he's not in the what you call it, the daily best ball, and so don't really have a price check on him, but he is definitely somebody that I'm excited about. And then Kyren Williams, probably not. He's not really a tournament player. Like you're not really going to play him in daily fantasy unless Darrell Henderson gets hurt as well. But definitely to me an exciting bench stash. For two reasons. He was so productive in college. He played really, really well in college. And then he was also, he also, I guess, he played himself into a week one role. They were going to use him in the offense in week one before he got injured. And that's really tough to do for a rookie. So the fact that he was able to do that means they really like him, and that once he comes back from injury, so he does have the high ankle sprain, but once he does come back, definitely excited to see how he does.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that too. Definitely a guy I think you should be stashing. Historical anomalies asks, and I don't think we're trade experts here, but I think it's an interesting question with the CMC trade rumors. I think Cam Akers plus an early pick would be enough for the Panthers to pull the trigger on CMC. I'm guessing they wouldn't really care about Akers in that trade. They're more so would care about the pick. I think Akers probably around the league right now doesn't really have any trade value. I'd be surprised if the Rams get much for him, but yeah, we'll see.
They're going to get a conditional day trade pick.
Yeah, I think that's about Akers' value. So I don't know. Do the Rams even have any early picks to offer? I don't know the latest in their situation, but I know they've kind of hemorrhaged the future with all the pick trades. So I don't think that's the most likely destination for CMC, but I would definitely have to look into the cap situations more. I'm not firmly, don't have a firm grasp on what's even possible there. But yeah, interesting question. We'll see if CMC gets moved in the next week or so. Connor, I think we talked about Breece Hall already, but I wanted to bring him up here just because he finally, for the first week, has appeared on this chart, which is just showing running backs with more than 45% of routes or rush attempts. So number one, that's exciting that he's finally getting that larger usage in terms of just being on the field more. And number two, you look at all the guys in this chart that have over 100 expected fantasy points, and it's all guys way to the left of the chart. McCaffrey, Barkley, Fournette, and Mixon. Those are 4 out of the top 5 guys in terms of percent rush attempt or route rate. And then you have 2 other guys scattered across this chart with over 100 expected fantasy points. You have Eckler in the middle there. That's because when he is on the field, they are designing looks for him in the pass game very heavily. So that kind of makes sense. And then Hall is the other outlier here with 103 expected fantasy points, even with a relatively low snap rate. So I just think that's really exciting that he's been able to generate that many expected fantasy points on that light of a workload. And there's still a ton of upside. Say is number one, Carter could go down. That would open up for him. Or number two, if he just continues to steal more of the work away, especially in the red zone. I think Carter's sort of vultured a lot from him there. So I think, yeah, like we talked about earlier, the Breece Hall stuff is really exciting. And I think if we were doing, if we had best ball resurrection ADP, I think he should be like a late first, early second round pick at this point. I think last week he was more like early third, late second. I would be probably even more aggressive on him in that format. But
So just looking at the data from last week, so he had 20 rush attempts. Michael Carter had 6. He had 7 routes run, and Michael Carter had 9. So if we're looking at that from a share perspective, I think the Jets only attempted they only had 21 dropbacks, 18 attempts. So you are looking at somebody who's getting a third, or last week getting about a third to a half of the routes and getting all the carries. So that's in modern day NFL starter, and
yep.
you put in the efficiency, you put in the fact that he's scoring points in every game script. I think that the first round pick is probably fair, but he's definitely I'm most excited when I get a discount like on that where I'm most like I feel like I can win by the biggest amount, and this is probably a simple point, by the biggest amount when I'm getting a bigger discount on him, because obviously we're kind of projecting going forward that he's going to dominate this backfield, and I want to buy at a price where that doesn't assume that, so that when he does, it's just a big win for me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I would guess, this is just winging it, but I would guess if there was a best ball season long tournament out right now, he would still be going sort of late second, early third. So I imagine there's still room to get him there. Obviously, there's a ton of exciting wide receivers in that range. So, it's tough to say without having that list and looking at the names there, but I'd be willing to be pretty aggressive on him just based on how he's performed so far. And I think things are still trending up for Breece Hall.
And we do have the daily best ball where he's going in the last round. So definitely ways to profit quite well from being more aggressive on Breece Hall than the market.
Yep. Agreed. All right, let's move on to the second chart here. So now this is looking at more rotational backup running backs, guys who are just in the 25 to 45% range in terms of percent of team plays where they have a rush attempt or a route. I think a couple things that stand out here. One, early season in the Jags backfield, Robinson had a pretty healthy lead on ETN in terms of expected points, in terms of snaps. That has been trending in the opposite direction over the past couple of weeks. And, if we had an updated version of this chart that just showed the last 3 weeks, ETN, I believe, would be ahead of James Robinson on this chart. So ETN is a guy in season long where I think that the sentiment for owners is probably still low on him. They spent an early round pick likely and haven't really got what they paid for, especially with the Jags offense being sort of down the last couple of weeks. But I'm looking to buy ETN in season long. That's definitely a move I would recommend. Connor, any comments on that situation or other situations you wanted to touch on here?
So just again looking at the numbers for just this week, James Robinson 12 rush attempts, Travis Etienne 10, and James Robinson 8 routes, Travis Etienne 13. So he would be ahead of Travis Etienne would be ahead of James Robinson on looking at more recent data. And I think for me, the way I look at these guys is that they're both young, really talented, kind of potential superstar runners that have the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, to share a backfield together. And that the way it's because it's a split backfield, I think they're both going to be overly discounted. And I guess I want to, it's like I want to take the cheaper one, and when they have their breakout game, I want to benefit. And I think it's they're both really fun picks in kind of DFS, best ball DFS. In terms of like Travis Etienne trending ahead of James Robinson, I do buy it to some degree, but I also think that James Robinson is so good that I don't think he's going to get dusted. So I want to buy. What I'm saying is, I want to buy ETN. I want to buy James Robinson, and when they have their smash games, and I think they each will have their smash games, I want to be in a position to benefit.
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, I think, and again, to the point of the Jaguars offense, I think it's a good time to buy Jaguars. I think we saw them start off the season really hot. They've had a couple games where they've looked really bad. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle for the Jags. I think there'll be better days ahead. So
For sure.
yeah. So that's a situation where, both those guys are probably discounted. You can get a good price. I do want to talk, Kenyon Drake is, without the best ball resurrection ADP, I think sort of talking about waivers guys is probably helpful and relevant this week. Kenyon Drake is a guy that just this past week, he saw 34 snaps out of 59 total team offensive snaps for the Ravens. J.K. Dobbins only saw 16. Mike Davis only saw 5. He led the team also in routes run, targets, carries at the running back position. And I'm worried that this Dobbins injury, he looked really bad yesterday, and I think he sat out for most of the second half with knee tightness. I'm worried that an IR move could be in the future for J.K. Dobbins, or at least there could be a stretch of time where he remains sort of limited or ineffective. And man, Drake might just be the last guy standing in that backfield. I think Mike Davis looks even dustier than Drake. Gus Edwards has had this super long recovery from the ACL tear. I don't have a ton of confidence in him coming back. Justice Hill dealing with a hamstring injury. Those are always tough to come back from. So I've seen the general industry sentiment to be like, ignore this Kenyon Drake game. Doesn't mean anything. But if you can add him for cheap, he's not a guy I'm spending half my fab budget on. But if you can get him for, sub 10%, I do think he is a pretty solid ad, especially in these the bye weeks coming up where you just kind of need guys to plug into the flex. I actually think Drake is a better ad than sort of how I've heard industry people talk about him so far. Do you have any thoughts on the Baltimore backfield? It's been kind of ugly.
I think you could get a good week from Kenyon Drake. I don't know if J.K. Dobbins is like, I don't know if he's gonna miss an extended stretch. I guess that the fact that maybe there's a probability that he might, and that's kind of like upside for Kenyon Drake. But from the comments from John Harbaugh, it was like, oh yeah, it just he just didn't feel like he was having the same explosiveness. So it doesn't really sound like a setback. Like in just or sorry, maybe it is maybe that's not accurate. That's not a setback, but it's not like he had a significant. It doesn't sound like he had a significant setback where he's going to be sidelined for weeks to ready to come back. Maybe it was just kind of like some swelling as he comes back from his ACL. And I even think that it's in play that he's good to go for next week or definitely the week after. Um,
Yep.
I suppose there is some floor there because Dobbins is recovering from the ACL, and you don't really know when he's going to be ready to kind of like take over. So yeah, I think he's he is definitely rosterable. And like you, I'm not particularly excited to do it. But we draft these zero or B teams, and even people who draft early running backs, sometimes you just need some points this week from your running back for cheap. And if you can get that from them, then it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. And sometimes I want to check my biases a little bit with these guys. Like the Latavius Murray situation is maybe an interesting one to highlight, where I think myself and a lot of people in the industry were like, oh, Latavius Murray, like he's old, he's washed up. It's just kind of a name that sounds gross for the amount of teams he's played for in the last 4 years. He doesn't look explosive at all. And I was completely downplaying that situation. Maybe like, obviously, in hindsight, I still wouldn't have spent $300 or whatever on Latavius Murray, but I think he was worth adding for cheap. And just because of the chance he could take over that backfield. And I think Drake is another guy where just like every bias in my brain is like Kenyon Drake washed up. He's been kind of a journeyman running back the past couple of years. Hasn't showed a lot.
Sean Siegel says he doesn't belong in the NFL.
Yeah, and
he's not an NFL talent anymore, which is probably not like it. There's probably is some truth to that.
Yeah, but I mean, just to continue my point, like he had 10 rushes for 120 yards last week. Dobbins had 7 for 15. Obviously, small sample, it's one game, but like I can't completely ignore the fact that he just looked way better than Dobbins, and I'm not sure that a week is going to magically fix this like knee tightening stuff. But yeah, it's gross. But again, I'm trying to check my biases on these old wash guys, especially on teams where like I don't need a star at running back. Like I just need some fucking points. I need more than
right.
More than
It'll get you some points.
Yeah,
but you definitely you don't you want to make sure that your bids are low, that your cost is low, and that when or if it doesn't look like the situation is as positive for Drake, like because he was inactive like the week before. When you see that again, that you're ready to toss him back with little regrets.
Yeah.
We did have a question in on how to monitor your results in the resurrection draft. So what you need to do is you need to hit the live tab and then go to best ball, and then you should be able to find the resurrection tournament from there.
Yeah, and your results, like the tournament the first points will be scored. Oh no, sorry, they should have been scored last week. It started.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a live. I'm seeing points populated.
Got it. Yep. Cool. All right, Connor. Let's move on to wide receiver. Unless there's other situations you wanted to touch on there at running back. So looking at wide receiver here, same chart for those who are familiar. We're looking at wide receiver opportunity measured in terms of weighted targets per route run versus fantasy points. So the results on your lineups on Sundays. And here on this chart, we have broken players into 4 quadrants. So in the top right, we have strong performers. These are players with very strong roles that are scoring a lot of points. In the bottom right quadrant, we have players that are potential buy lows. They have really strong roles. They're earning a lot of opportunity, but they're not converting it to fantasy points at a high rate. That's a potential area to look for buy lows. And then we also have sell highs in the top left corner. These are guys that have very, I would say, minimal or middling roles, but are scoring a lot of fantasy points. So that's a situation where you might want to potentially sell a guy high there. And then finally, bottom left quadrant, jokingly, we have sort of the cardio specialists. So those are guys who are just out there getting some wind sprints in, and they're not really playing football. They're just kind of getting their cardio in out there. But yeah, the first thing I want to mention on this chart, just for fun, Connor, I included Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews this week just to see how they compared against the elite wide receivers. And I was I was blown away by where Mark Andrews pops up on this chart. He has the highest weighted targets per route run out of any player that's running more than 85% of routes, higher than Devontae Adams, higher than Cooper Kupp, higher than Justin Jefferson. All these, elite wide receivers that we were taking the first 6 picks of fantasy this year. Mark Andrews is showing up as a more dominant wide receiver than them at the tight end position in terms of role. Now, one, like, he's probably not going to score as much of those guys, number one, because he still is a tight end. He probably doesn't have quite the same receiving prowess as them, although I'd argue it's close. But I think the bigger factor, number two, is that he's on the Ravens in sort of a lower volume environment than those guys. So, yeah, I don't know. This chart just made me even more bullish on Mark Andrews. Like, I think he was a steal this summer going the late second round. And now I think if there are fantasy drafts today, I would be taking him, right. I think probably behind Jefferson and Kupp, but I think I'd be taking him ahead of Chase and Adams. And then someone like Diggs would be very close for me. It's just such a positional advantage to have Andrews or Kelsey in fantasy this year. Any thoughts here on these?
Are you talking a tight end premium or?
Yeah, I guess tight end premium. I think I would go even higher for I'm not sure in tight end premium that Andrews and Kelsey shouldn't be number one and number two, because I honestly have a really hard time seeing how in the 3-week shootout. Okay, well, maybe this is talking about FFPC. So say there are FFPC main event drafts held today. Let's use that as a hypothetical. I think I would take Andrews number one, Kelsey number two, because they're really the only tight ends that even approach this kind of usage. They've legit alpha number one wide receiver usage at the tight end position, and the rest of the tight end position has completely flopped. I think it's going to be it's really hard to see how you win in a 3-week shootout without one of those guys. So maybe I'm like a little ahead of my skis here, and you can certainly argue for McCaffrey, Barkley, Kupp or Jefferson over those guys, but I think they're all at least in the same tier. And personally, I would go with one of the elite tight ends and then hope I can still get some elite wide receivers and sort of running backs later in the draft, because I know there's no way you're getting any tight end that's going to match the scoring over a 3-week period in tight end premium of Kelsey and Andrews.
Right. So I mean that doesn't sound like the worst. It doesn't sound like the worst pick to make. My only kind of concern would be that it is still a lot of points to pay for a tight end. And so if I look at FFPC points, so Travis Kelce outscores every wide receiver. He's the highest scoring flex player. But my only concern would be that even though that's a 6-week sample size, it is kind of hard to see that continue all season. But at the same, just given that he's an older player, but at the same time, he looks great, and the fact that he is the highest scoring flex player on FFPC it does make for a very, very strong argument for tight ends to be 1 and 2, in FFPC. Honestly, it is a bit of a hot take, but it's one that's hard to really throw stones at. So
yeah, and I don't want to go last point I'll make here is and this is going down a rabbit hole of hypotheticals, but if it was a 1-week final, I don't think I would take Andrews or Kelsey there, right? Because I think in a 1-week sample size, I could definitely see David Njoku having a big game, even maybe Kyle Pitts coming back from the grave and having a big game. But over a 3-week stretch, I just think these two guys, given how different their roles are than any other tight end in the league, one of them is going to separate so massively from the field. In a way, I think it's possible at wide receiver that happens too, right? Like Kupp can go off, but I think at wide receiver, you're more likely to find, the Amon-Ra St. Brown of last year. Maybe pick up Wan'Dale Robinson and he puts together a crazy run down the stretch. I think that's possible to find those diamonds in the rough at wide receiver in a way that, like, at tight end over a 3-week period, I think you're just like, you're not going to find it. So, but anyways, that was a lot of time at tight ends for the wide receiver chart. Let's talk about some receivers here. Connor, any guys that stand out to you? Maybe in the buy, I guess a question to make more targeted. Any of the guys like hovering in that buy low range that you are most excited about going forward?
So obviously we had the Brandon Ayuk call last week, and he had a very strong performance last week, which was really nice to see at really low ownership. It's hard to really make a case for anybody that we haven't talked about before. Zay Jones is showing up as getting a strong target per route run, and obviously ridiculously cheap. So interested there. Josh Reynolds is somewhat interesting, but I'm almost more interested in that Jameson Williams is coming back soon and would be taking over that role.
Yeah, I think Reynolds is just to follow up on Reynolds. I think a great spot start. Say Chark misses a game or Amon-Ra misses a game and Jameson still hasn't come back yet. I think you can do a lot worse than putting Reynolds into your flex as like a spot start. But yeah, I think in the long term, with Jameson coming back, with Chark, not suffering a major injury, like I have a hard time seeing that payoff in the long run. But I think a good like DFS player spot start in the right sort of injury situation landscape there. But yeah, continue. It sounds like you had some other thoughts.
So Robbie Anderson does look interesting, given that he's now been traded to the Cardinals.
Yeah.
The Cardinals are a tricky offense now just because they haven't played very well. But given that they do get Nuke back and Hollywood is now injured, I do think Robbie Anderson, when he does play, will be really interesting as a kind of number 2 that could benefit from Nuke drawing coverage.
Yep. Yeah, I think those are all good ones. Yeah, it's tough to,
it's like we already talked about Elijah Moore. Like it feels like there should be a blow up game, and then they have 18 pass attempts. And it's like, do I really want to? Do I really want to go down that route again?
Yeah, I'm starting to almost throw in the towel on Elijah Moore. Like I still think any guy that's running 90 to 95% of the routes, he's worth the DF. Like I still think he's a good DFS play. He's going to be really low owned in the matchup where they're forced to throw. I think he could luck into sort of a big target game. Just, we saw it a little bit with Allen Robinson last week, right? Like not a massive game, but these type of like wind sprint guys, just the fact that they're on the field means they can stumble into 5 catches and a touchdown. Right. And, I still think Elijah Moore's talent is good enough that he could break off a long play here or there and be sort of a good DFS play. But yeah, man, it would have to be sort of a large tournament play, I think, because he's not really earning the targets at this point. Like he's not even in the buy low for those. Looking at the chart, he's more in cardio specialists near guys like Josh Palmer, Allen Robinson, Robbie Anderson. So it's a little scary for him from sort of a season long perspective. But
it definitely feels like a gross play.
Yeah.
But the only thing about it is, like, should he be earning 0 targets? I think the answer is no. And will they find a way to correct that? Kind of hope so.
Yeah.
So it's a very uncomfortable play, but he is a player that is good enough that if he were to hit, would hit in a really big way.
Yeah. Well, last guy, I think we should touch on the only guy who's, in the sell high quadrant Gabriel Davis, and I heard to sort of paraphrase Hayden Winks on a podcast, he said that the earned target share bros lose again with Gabriel Davis, and I think it's kind of it was in jest, but it's this weird thing with Gabe Davis where I think there's this stance where you can be pro Gabe Davis and acknowledge that his earned target share is going to be pretty bad. And it's just like very unique situation where he's on the best offense in the league, with the highest scoring expectation of any quarterback in Josh Allen. And just that is like, we're so used to thinking about sustainability in terms of target share and targets and yards. But with Gabe Davis, I think this touchdown stuff, like, is somewhat sticky and you can rely on it, even though his target share is going to be bad. I would still make the point that, back to last week, he was going in the same range as guys like DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Cortland Sutton, these guys who are earning massive roles. And I can't justify like valuing Gabe higher than that. But that said, like, if you have Gabe Davis in fantasy, like, I still think you should be starting him. Like, this is maybe like a lukewarm take, but I think like he's probably slightly overvalued, but this touchdown stuff and this big play stuff, I think, is like somewhat sustainable, even though it's really, really low target volume for him.
Yeah. And I think the volume as well is not terrible.
You mean the raw volume, like not the share, but the raw volume? Yeah.
Like last week he did have he had 5 targets and 88 air yards, which is like not amazing, but it's not bad either. And the week before he had 168 air yards on 6 targets.
Yeah, he's still capping out. Like, I think his highest target total in a game is like 6 this year, and it's been a lot of like 4 or 5.
He's probably going to earn 5 to 6 really, really valuable targets.
Yeah,
every week, and the target share is always going to be low, but it's almost like they have so many pass attempts that even a low target share is still getting you 5 to 6, and then those 5 to 6 have such high touchdown equity that he is going to be a point scorer, but definitely not at a value that he belongs in the third and fourth rounds.
Yeah, agreed.
So I think we agree there. It's just interesting to look through the numbers.
Yeah, he's a true sort of anomaly in the data this year. So an interesting talking point. Let's move on to this next group of wide receivers in the 65 to 85% of routes run categories. So these are guys that are, anywhere from sort of close to full-time players like Diggs, Tyreek Hill, to guys that are more maybe slot guys or, guys that are not earning a vast majority of their team's routes. Connor, the first guy I wanted to talk about here, and I tweeted this in my thread, was Chris Olave. He breaks the chart here in terms of the role. Now, I think like he had these insane
outliers. You have to change the chart too.
What'd you say?
You were calling out. You had to change the axis of this chart to accommodate so on the first page, this weighted targets per route run only goes to 80%.
Yeah.
And you had to change to 85% because now they're breaking the chart. But if it was at 80%, they wouldn't even be on the page.
Yeah. They don't even show up if you kept the axes the same. So I had to adjust it. Yeah, Olave and Tyreek. I mean, Tyreek's obvious, like, man, he's the biggest smash this year. We can talk about him in a sec, but Olave is maybe an interesting guy from a season-long perspective where I think there's still a buying opportunity on him. The fantasy points haven't quite caught up to his role. And I think the owner could be spooked by that concussion. I mean, maybe you should be slightly spooked by that concussion. It did look bad, but man, his role is just massive. And compared to some of these other rookies, he's just in such a better situation. Drake London has the whole sort of Kyle Pitts problem of the Atlanta offense just regressing to the 1940s. You have guys like Garrett Wilson who are just not getting the full set of the team snaps. Sky Moore, even worse in that spectrum. So Olave, I think, is the rookie I'm most excited about going forward, and is somebody I'd be willing to pay up for if I'm trying to think of a good like example of a trade offer I would send in a league, like any sort of middling running back. Maybe you can send off David Montgomery and catch an owner falling asleep who might give you Chris Olave, like running backs in that sort of range. I might be looking to move for Olave.
Okay, Sam, over under. How many people listen to this podcast drafted David Montgomery?
Yeah, that's true. The Venn diagram of people who listen to this podcast and drafted David Montgomery is tiny.
And if you are one of those people, just know that we love you, but you're in the minority.
Yeah. So this advice I'm just realizing was for absolutely nobody out here listening, but maybe there's got to be one of you who drafted David Montgomery out there, and get rid of him. Let's get down to 0 David Montgomery owners that listen to this podcast.
This is an interesting point about Garrett Wilson. So even last week, I thought, oh, maybe that's just week 1 stuff. But even last week, he only ran a route on 62% of the dropbacks. Like,
yeah, it's just like
he had 13 routes last week.
Yeah. What the fuck? We hate that. I mean, it's just the Braxton Berrios stuff. It's just when there's that fourth, like, it goes under, I think, under noticed and not talked about much. But when there's that fourth wide receiver out there that the team likes, that's going to just hurt everybody unless you're on a really good offense. I think, like, Diggs can get away with the fact that there's these sort of fourth wide receivers who get some looks and he doesn't have a 100% role. Obviously isn't the Bills. Like, someone like that can get away with it. But what's the team like the Jets?
And when he does play, when they get him on the field, they're like, okay, we're throwing to Diggs.
Yeah.
Like, when they take him off the field, it's to give him a breather so that they can throw to him more when he comes back. Whereas these other offenses, it's definitely tougher.
I mean, come on, don't give Jeff Smith 8 snaps. Just give those to Garrett Wilson. There's no need for that. Yeah. Anyways, this question was interesting from Nick that I wanted to bring up. London or Bateman rest of season? Connor, why don't you go first here, and then I'll share my stance.
So I would lean probably Bateman at this stage. And
yeah, I'm with you.
Just because obviously we're worried about the injury. We want to come back from the injury. And the Raven, it's one of those things of like the talent is Drake London probably has a slight edge in talent, slight edge, but Bateman is kind of, it's holding him to an almost draw. And then the offense that you want to be involved in is so obviously the Ravens over the Falcons, where they're going to score so many more touchdowns. They're going to have so much more production overall. You got to play with Lamar Jackson. Like, I'm generally weighing talent over offense. But when the talent is that close, and then one offense is so much clearly better than the other, I guess I think the offense kind of overrules the rest of it.
Yeah, and I'm with you there. And on the Falcons, I was just looking at this. I think a big problem with the Falcons is they need to be pushed to pass. If it's close or they're winning, like Mariota, I think was 13 of 14 last week. Like, these insanely low pass total games. And I just wanted to point out, on their schedule, it's not getting a lot better. So they have the Bengals this next week. That could be good. The Bengals could push them. I could see that one being good for London Pitts. Then it goes Panthers, Chargers. Again, that would be okay. But then Panthers again, then the Bears, then the Commanders, then the Steelers, then the Saints. I mean, Panthers twice, Bears, Commanders, Steelers. I mean, that's 5 of the next 7 games where I don't really expect the other team to push them, and they're going to get away with just this Caleb Huntley 15 carries, Tyler Algier 10 carries, like these games where they don't need to throw it all. So I'm really nervous about the volume in Atlanta, and I would also be on the Bateman side of things. I mean, the foot injuries are always scary. I guess the fact that he wasn't on IR, like I'm retaining some optimism he'll be able to come back this year and produce. I'm going for the offense that has more upside, even though London in a better offense with the way he's dominating targets could really, really smash it. I don't think it's going to happen with Atlanta this year.
I think I would feel slightly better about it if they were losing games, but they're going 500 right now. They've won 3 games, so like it's not like the coach is going to be under this pressure to change approach, or his job is under pressure. Like you can feel pretty good that they're going to play like this for the rest of the year. Unfortunately,
yep. Couple quick hits I had, and then I think we should move on. I think Tyquan Thornton is a guy that you should add everywhere. I would say FFPC style leagues, I would go up to 10% ish for Thornton. Your other leagues, you can probably add him for free. Your more casual home leagues. And then Chris Godwin, I think, is one of the best buy low candidates out there. He is showing a bigger role week in and week out. And we often see guys coming off of ACL tears. We see the second half of the year, they show out a lot better. It often takes them a while to get their confidence and even sort of their snap rate up in the first half of the season. So I'm expecting big things ahead for Godwin. Any other quick hits you wanted to touch on here, Connor?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. I'll let you have the floor here on this last chart for the wide receiver opportunity versus fantasy points. And these are all guys getting less than 65% of their team routes. I think a couple interesting rookies to talk about here. One, our cover boy in Wan'Dale Robinson for this episode. Wandale, sorry. I forgot he had the Latino pronunciation there. But yeah, do you want to talk? Let's talk about Wandale. What is our level of excitement going forward?
So obviously really excited to see him with strong target earning ability. So the fact that he is not playing the snaps that we want yet is I guess means you're not going to start him next week. But the Giants really do need a lot of help at wide receiver. So the fact that he is producing at a really high rate on a per snap basis, and in both in terms of kind of like getting catches and yards, and then also that he got the touchdown for them, means that he is someone where you have to feel good that he's going to be a big part of their offense as the season goes on. One concern is that it's the Giants, so that the passing game is probably not going to be too big of a pie. But he's a really talented rookie. He dominated in college. His first is I guess his second game back, he played really strong. And his efficiency has been quite good. So definitely excited to add him to a bench and wait for him to kind of take off a bit.
Yep, agreed. Just to add a little bit more numbers to it, he was only at like 25%, actually under 25% routes last week, but I expect that to grow. There's nobody really ahead of him there that could challenge him from a talent perspective. So yeah, great person to add to your benches. And he could be, if we're looking for an Amon-Ra St. Brown this year, a guy who sort of does nothing the first half of the season, then comes on huge down the stretch, I would look to Wandale, Sky Moore, and Tyquan Thornton as sort of the 3 top candidates there. Now, odds of anybody doing what St. Brown did, obviously really low, but we got to take some stabs here. And those guys all profile as, day 2 NFL picks on teams, not a lot of wide receiver talent ahead of them that are flashing strong target earning abilities in limited sample sizes. So yeah, all three of those
And
guys.
one point about Wandale that I think is easy to miss. So people see someone with his stature and athletic kind of archetype. Oh, he's earning a bunch of targets. Must be a gadget guy. So he actually got an average depth of target of 9.3 last week. 37 air yards on 4 targets. So definitely not a gadget guy, an actual like legitimate running proper routes NFL receiver, and we're excited to see what he can do the rest of the year.
Yep. And last thing I'll mention on him is I think, also he did play running back quite successfully in college. So I do think there is a bit of a contingent upside where Barkley to go down. The Giants don't have a ton in that running back room. And I do think he would have a chance at least at earning some kind of Debo Samuel, Curtis Samuel-esque running back usage in the Giants were Barkley to go down. But obviously that's, more of a contingency sort of fringe scenario, but I do think that is at least possible given his profile. Let's end with tight ends here, Connor. We, for people who've been listening, this is the same chart we've always had, similar to the running back one, where we're looking at percent of team dropbacks, and we just want to know on dropbacks, are these tight ends out there? Are they running routes? And we sort of ordered the chart as so. So guys running the most routes, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, etc. on the far left-hand side of this chart. And we also have target per route run shown at the bottom here. So how many targets are they earning when they actually run a route? And ADOT. So are they being used as sort of a shallow area dump off guy, aka Tyler Higbee, or are they being used as a wide receiver down the field like our boy Greg Dulcich with the second highest ADOT of any tight end in this chart, behind only Kyle Pitts? I think that's a natural place to start here, Connor.
So we wanted to make him our cover boy, but the flagship show said no, that's our cover boy. And
they said they would literally replace us within 10 minutes if we had that as our cover boy. So we had to capitulate.
Yeah. I guess for an 18th round pick that was often undrafted, getting a very strong route share is super encouraging. Then I guess he's also getting down the field looks. I guess the only possible concern is that the target share is still pretty low.
Yeah, so he ran a route. He ran 27 routes, I believe, on 34 dropbacks and saw just 3 targets. But yeah, I think on a 1 week sample size, the target rate is extremely variable. I'm just way more excited on the fact that he was out there running all those routes. I mean, he iced Tomlinson, Saubert, Alberto, a healthy scratch. He iced all these guys that have been getting looks in past weeks. So yeah, I'm extremely bullish. Like, I think it's fair to call him, a low end tight end 1 already for the rest of the year, maybe high end tight end 2. Like,
and that is the other piece that so I'm worried about the 11% target share, but when compared to other tight ends, a rookie getting that high percentage of routes and ADOT immediately compared to other tight ends, it's like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and his his route he still route the other tight ends is really strong.
Yeah, and just to give for people making sit-start decisions, what is the line for Dulcich? Like, I'm still playing Njoku over him. I'm still probably playing TJ Hawkinson over him. But then once we get down to the Hayden Hurst, Dawson Knox, Gerald Everett range, I think I'm going to go with the upside with Dulcich there. It's highly variable. We don't have a ton of data on him, but he's out there running all the routes. He's being used downfield. You're looking for upside with these, late tight end stabs. Like I want a guy who can catch like a 30-yard seam pass for a touchdown. I don't really want the guys like, Conklin where you're just praying for like I guess Conklin has a high ADOT. That's maybe a bad example, but the guy like Austin Hooper where you're just praying, he gets a red zone touchdown. He's never going to make a play down the field. So I'm pretty excited about Dulcich going forward, and congrats to everybody who stashed him or drafted him in the 18th round. Anything else? I mean, we talked about Andrews and Kelsey. Just they blow everybody else out of the water here. I think it's kind of a similar story that we've touched on with Kittle, Goddard, and Waller before, where like the roles still look pretty good, but
it's nice seeing Kittle's route share creep up even more to the number 2 route share, 18% target per route run, and it is nice to see him getting more involved after kind of get not quite airballed, but close to it in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think like that 18% number for Kittle and for Waller, I just noticed coincidentally also has that number. Like it's not bad, but it's kind of a bummer considering it doesn't really stand out from the rest of the field here. Like it's probably slightly above average, but you got Zach Ertz, 20% targets per route run. You got Dallas Goedert there at 17. You got Ingram at 18, Higbee at 24%. Like all these middling guys, you got a lot later. Like Waller and Kittle aren't really separating from them,
Right.
which I think at this point, like I'd rather have Waller and Kittle than those guys I mentioned, but I think it was a miss potentially to be drafting them where I was this offseason. I think I have a lot of both of those guys, and I think probably the move this year, obviously in retrospect, if you could do it over again, you would take a ton of Kelsey, you would take a ton of Andrews, and you'd probably fade the middle round tight ends, which I did hear some people advocating for this offseason. So congrats.
I'm not ready to throw in the towel on Kittle. Just
I don't think you should give up either, but it's
I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that you were saying that people should cut him, but I'm still ready to invest in Kittle, but Waller, I'm a bit more worried, just given that we had the bigger sample size, and still have that kind of like 18% target share, which is not really where you want it.
Yeah, it's not great, and hamstring injuries for older players also not great. Let's wrap this thing up with the we get asked about this chart every week. I get people DMing me, Sam, can you make a third string tight end chart? The backup tight end chart isn't quite scratching the itch. I can't quite commit to that yet. That's still going to be behind the paywall, but the backup tight end chart we do have this week. A lot of really exciting names on here. We got Eric Saubert, we got Pharaoh Brown, we got Tommy Tremble, guys who I definitely know what team they're on. Tanner Hudson, that's another guy. Definitely know what team he's on. Definitely don't have to look it up.
Okay, now that you're done trolling us all, please give me actionable information on these tight ends, Sam.
Actually, I did have some notes here. So there's some interesting tight end injuries to monitor. Waller, we talked about. So Jesper Horsted, who I believe came from the Bears and is now on the Raiders, he actually got the start and ran sort of a Waller like route share when both Waller and Moreau missed time. So for those of you who are really desperate, monitor the Moreau and Waller situations, and in tight end premium, I don't think Horsted would be the worst flyer. Similarly, in Tampa Bay, there's an injury situation. Cameron Brate went down with a pretty scary neck injury. I probably should have led with this one because I think it's the more exciting ad, but I think Cade Otton, he's probably been scooped up in your high stakes, really competitive leagues, but he's probably out there in a ton of casual leagues. I think he is a pretty good start going forward. I expect Brate to miss some time. He's earned, I believe, 7 targets in his last start when Brate went down. So decent role there for Otton. And then Hendershot is the other guy with Schultz. Let me actually check the Dallas routes last week, but Schultz did not play. And what did the tight end situation look like? I believe it was Hendershot that was ahead. Yep. So Hendershot ran 23 routes on 38 dropbacks. Jake Ferguson ran 15. Hendershot saw 5 targets. So he's leading the tight ends there in routes. Again, if you're really desperate, I think these are 3 injury situations to monitor in Dallas, Tampa Bay, and Las Vegas. And then the last backup tight end thing I want to mention, the Daniel Bellinger role. This is more anecdotally. I wish I had more data to back this up, but it seems to be growing, and they're also scheming him like running plays. I believe he had a rushing touchdown in the past 2 weeks. Yeah, actually looking at this is from Nathan Janke at PFF, but Bellinger's percentage of offensive snaps has risen almost every week this year, from right at 50% in week 1 to above 85% this past week. So he's really taking over the tight end role there in New York, and on a team where, we've talked about how barren the wide receiver room is. I think for the more casual leagues out there where Bellinger is still on waivers, he is definitely worth an ad. Yeah, so I kind of got excited there in the backup tight ends. I'm not sure I left you.
Tell me about the contingent value for Harrison Bryant.
Sadly, I wish that was a joke, but I feel like we've talked about that on every podcast so far. So
he's earning. He's got that high target per route run. When David Njoku goes down, you're just going to be licking your lips that you're licking your chops that you get the number 1 tight end in Cleveland.
Yeah, we are the only podcast talking about Harrison Bryant every single week.
Right. That's going to be the best victory lap of all time.
Yeah.
When we win money with Harrison Bryant.
Yeah. I think, yeah. All right. Well, that was, we'll maybe hit the 3rd string tight ends next week, but going to have to close it out there. That was fun, Connor. Talked a lot about it, a lot of interesting situations. I'll just do a couple quick plugs. Number 1, if you want to, again, like I talked about at the top, if you want to join these streams live to ask questions, get yourself into the Ship Chasing Discord. A lot of good conversation going on there. We also have Pete, Gretch, and Pat hopping into those as well, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of. But yeah, that's number 1. Number 2, you can check out all of my takeaways from these charts on Twitter at Sherman_FFB on Twitter, with sort of more detailed thoughts on these charts. Connor, anything to plug before we get out of here?
Yeah, not in particular. Subscribe, Rotoviz. Join us in the Discord. Always a lot of fun. Would love to. Anybody who listens to the show and would like to chat with us, we're always there, or not always available, but generally available.
Yep. Yeah. Feel free to leave mean YouTube comments as well. That really is a good way to engage with us. Always happy to answer those.
The untouchables.
Yeah. Well, anyways, that was fun. For backup tight end chasing, we will see you next week. Good luck in week 7, everybody.